This video is sponsored by BetterHelp. Hey everyone, welcome back to Reissued. If you're new here, my name is Andrew, and I have a problem. Well, two problems. First, I'm a bit of an art collector slash art hoarder, and I have way too much art around my house that often needs to be reframed. And two, I'm finding framing to be increasingly difficult. It either feels really junky, or it's complicated, or it's expensive. And so in this video, I'm gonna be pulling out a bunch of art that I collected, that I thrifted, and I'm gonna be reframing those in thrifted frames, and I'm gonna show you my tips and techniques for getting an expensive, high-end look with minimal cost. Can't wait to get started, let's jump on in. So as I mentioned, I have a ton of artwork in my house. I love the really eclectic and cultured and personal look that art can give to a space. I'm running out of wall space, but that's a different problem for a different day. I also am a bit of a hoarder when it comes to thrifting frames. Anytime that I see a great frame at the thrift store, I go ahead and pick it up. You never know when you're gonna need a specific size frame for a certain art piece or a specific area in your house, and so I'd rather just have a lot of things on hand to choose from, and I'm glad that we're gonna be getting some use out of those today. I used to frame a lot of my artwork with sort of off-the-rack framing from Michaels or IKEA, those kind of black or white melamine frames, super simple. I still like that look, and I have a couple of those around my house. I think that they work fine. However, I'm finding that one, they're not very durable. I've had to replace several of them over time because they just either chip away or pull apart or crack. That also used to feel like a really affordable option, but now it feels like the prices of those are kind of creeping up. And then also, as I acquire more vintage and high quality and antique pieces in my house, somehow it feels like the simple melamine frames don't really sync up with that. So I'm wanting to get a little bit more of an eclectic vintage look in the frames as well, and so thrifted frames have been a great way to get that. For a couple of my very favorite or most unusual shaped art pieces, I have had them custom framed at Michaels. I think that can be worth it if it's a piece that you really love or is really personal to you. However, that does get expensive, so I'm certainly not gonna do that for all of my pieces. So today, we're pulling out the thrifted frames, we're reframing, we're refinishing the frames where they were damaged. We're gonna be doing some painting on the mats, covering the mats with fabric. Just a lot of different techniques here to try to make the thrifted frames work for these pieces. Even though all the hacks in this video are gonna be super simple and DIY friendly, I was rushing to get all these products done before I went on my trip to Italy. And so this whole video was a bit of a reminder that as much joy as the DIY life brings me, the stress is real. From balancing multiple projects at once, to spending countless boring hours editing each video, to being right in the middle of a project and feel like everything is going wrong. There was so much of that for this project. I constantly feel overwhelmed. So I started prioritizing my mental health with BetterHelp, which is the sponsor of today's video. BetterHelp has been an amazing tool for me to assist with managing stress and maintaining the confidence and positive mindset to see things through even when the projects, life changes, and day-to-day thought patterns get tough. After answering just a few questions, BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist who is trained to listen and offer helpful, unbiased advice. Finding the right therapist is one of the most important and most daunting parts of therapy, and with BetterHelp, you can switch therapists at any time. It took me a couple tries until I found the right fit for me. BetterHelp gives you the option for sessions with your therapist via phone call, video call, or messaging, all right from your phone or computer. To get started with BetterHelp, visit betterhelp.com/reissued or choose Reissued at sign up to get a discount off your first month. Okay, project time. Let me lay out everything that we're gonna be working with, and I'll show you the problems before we can start with the solutions. Starting here, I have this piece from my friend Jenny Horn. She's a local artist here in Noonan, Georgia. This was from a show that she did at the Boyd Gallery almost 2 years ago, and this has been sitting unframed, undisplayed in my house. I would love to pop her into this frame right here that I got at the REISSUED for $3, hoping that it fits perfectly and we won't have any issues there, but we'll see. Next up, I have this botanical print that I got at the REISSUED this week for $3. I like this kind of vintage scientific drawing kind of feel. The mat is in kind of rough shape and it's a color that I don't particularly like, so we're gonna need to address that. I think it would look really nice in this frame right here that I got at the REISSUED for $5. I like this kind of olive green velvet around the edges. It has these kind of gold plasticky pieces here, and then it's missing one of those at the bottom. So we're gonna have to get creative in addressing that. This is the piece that I purchased at the Brown Elephant in Chicago. I think this is an original piece. Really love the way that this looks, but the frame is totally busted. It's broken on the back, and so we're gonna need to reframe this entirely. I'm thinking that we can keep the matte, but I'm not sure that I love the white on white there, so we might address that. And I think the whole thing would look better in this frame that I just picked up this morning at Goodwill for $5. Love the wood and gold. I have several frames like that in my house, but this one is pretty damaged. There's some kind of goop and some scratches and issues with that, so we might be able to do some repairs on that. This is a piece that I picked up at the REISSUED a while ago that's been living on my bedroom fireplace mantle. I really like this kind of like vintage landscape look, but then with the really strange creature involved. This looks really nice in this frame, but you can see right here that there's a gap at the bottom and at the top. This was not the original piece for this frame and it doesn't really fit properly. I'm hoping that it will fit better in that frame that I got at the REISSUED. And then I have a different plan for something to go in this frame. I picked up this Picasso print at the REISSUED a while back. I really like the blue-green color palette and the really sculptural lines. Not a fan of this light blue matte though. It's giving that kind of like 80s baby blue feel. I don't think it's doing the piece any favors. I also see a little bit of that blue tone on the frame, so I might need to knock that out as well. The framing job here is good, but I think that the matte needs to be addressed. And then finally, there's this Rothko print that's been hanging in my atrium for a while. I like the color palette in that room. I think the frame looks kind of cheap and it's actually broken as well. So I'm gonna try to switch it over to this metal frame that I thrifted, I think at the REISSUED as well. Hopefully that'll be a little bit more solid and hopefully that'll be an easy transfer. Okay, so now that we have a rough plan in place, let me walk you through what I did to make each of these frames work.
Okay, let's start simple and do the basic frame swaps first. I would skip over this part entirely since switching out a frame seems kind of self-explanatory. However, when you're working with thrifted frames, it's likely that you're going to be dissecting a custom frame job, which can be a bit more complicated. So here are a couple of the types of frames you might encounter. First, the cheap off-the-rack frames I mentioned most often have modern bendable tabs, so I'm folding those up to remove the Rothko print from the cheap broken Hobby Lobby frame. Easy. The sturdy metal frame that I'm switching over to has to be unscrewed in the corners to allow the art to be removed. So I go in with a flathead screwdriver and turn the screws 1 or 2 times to loosen the joint and allow the top, bottom, and sides to separate. Then I can pull out these little spring clips that hold the art flat against the glass. Once I slide the art between the glass and the foam backing, I can put the frame back together around the edges, tighten the screws, and then slide those spring clips back into place. One done. I'm going to show all the finished pieces in their new frames at the end of the video, so stay tuned. Next, let's level up to a more complex reframe. I think this piece was a custom frame job for a Hobby Lobby or Kirkland's type piece of art, but it's already been hacked by another DIYer. So let's lift off the tape and pull it apart. Unfortunately, the art is not even close to fitting in the wood frame that I had intended. I'm really bad at eyeballing frame sizes apparently, so we'll have to get creative with a new solution later on. The next piece is another custom framing job. We can tell since it has a sealed paper back. So let's gently cut along the edges with a utility knife to see what's going on under here. Looks like we have some little tabs that have been nailed in along the edges. They're too stiff to bend, so I'm going to pull them out along 2 sides by wedging my flathead screwdriver underneath, just enough to allow me to pull them out with pliers. Unfortunately, the art is just a touch too small for the frame. Not enough that we'll notice it, but just enough that it will need something to hold it in the center so that it doesn't drop down and leave a gap. So I flip over the existing mat to the white side and tape it on using some painter's tape made into a loop. Masking tape or painter's tape tends to be kinder on the artwork than clear tape, in case I ever want to reframe this. Let's pop in the art and push the tabs back into their old holes to hold everything in place. Then we can tape the paper back on to give the back a better finish. I follow the same process for the large Picasso print, only this one has staples instead of tabs, so we can bend them out of the way instead of removing them. Sounds easier. However, the glass on this one was taped to the art and the mat, so I had to remove it entirely. And then when trying to pop it back in, the staples made it really tricky, and I gripped too hard on one of the corners, and I snapped it right off. And crap. Are you art? Are you art? I picked up a piece of replacement glass at Lowe's for $17. I'm really lucky this frame was the standard size, but I think they can do custom cuts as well. This time I recruited my parents to help me guide the glass around the staples and back into place. After modifying the mat, which I'll show you later, we reinsert the art and fold the staples back down. Then tape the paper back in place to finish things off. Now let's move on to mats. First, I thrifted a larger frame for the Renaissance landscape, so I need to make a custom mat to make the irregular shape of the artwork work. I have some stiff cardboard on hand from the back of this large-scale drawing pad that I think will work perfectly. After cutting it to fit my 16 by 20 inch frame, I carefully measure the size of the art piece and cut a matching hole in the center of my new mat. I want the entire piece to show so there won't be any wiggle room for overlap, but we'll deal with that later by taping the art to a larger piece of paper and taping that to the mat. Now let's give our mats a more aesthetic finish. And what's the simplest solution for changing the look of a mat? Paint, right? Since we're putting the botanical piece in the green velvet and wood frame, a simple off-white should work well for that mat. One of these shades from my kitchen or bedroom walls should work. I opted for the color match of the shade Blanched from Magnolia in an eggshell finish. This is the wall color in my bedroom. I found it was best to apply a little paint at a time to try to get a thin and even finish. We don't want this to look too gloppy or brush strokey. Instead, we want to try to maintain the texture of the paper and just alter the shade. The paint wanted to dry very quickly, so I had to work fast, but I was able to achieve a mostly even finish. The shiny glass is going to hide any little sheen issues. I go back in with a tiny brush to get the inner rim. This would have been way easier with the mat separated from the artwork, but everything was glued together to the backing, so we're just gonna go slow and make it work. After 2 light coats, I think it looks pretty good. For the other mats, I thought a warm textured look would be better than a flat painted look, so let's cover them in fabric. I pulled some fabrics that I had on hand that were very neutral, but would be softer and less harsh than white. I picked up these rolls of fabric at a REISSUED in North Carolina a while back for $5 each. To establish a technique that worked for me, I started by referencing a video on DIY fabric mats from Donata Delano. I'll link to it down below in case you want to check out her instructions as well. She used just double-sided tape for her project, and so I purchased some and tried that method to start. However, I found that it wasn't strong enough to be able to hold my fabric, so I experimented with a couple different methods before I found a winner. And here's what worked for me. First, I'd stick the fabric down before I cut the center to be sure that things don't move around after I make my center cuts. I did this with either double-sided tape along the inner edge of the mat or a glue stick all over the mat. Neither one will be strong enough to hold down the fabric permanently, but both adhesives helped hold things in place and kept them from sliding around or wrinkling up. Then I cut about an inch inside the opening of the mat and make diagonal cuts right to the corner of the mat. To fold the fabric around and hold it in place effectively, I pull out the hot glue gun. I start in the corners, being sure to pull the fabric tightly. Then I work my way around, pulling the fabric tight and pressing down firmly to mold the hot glue into a flat shape before it cools. That way everything will sit nice and flat within the frame. Any little threads that hang around in the corners can be smoothed down with white glue if you're patient, or hot glue if you have steel fingers like me. Now we can flip the whole thing over and start gluing the other side more permanently. The glue stick did a decent job of keeping things evenly affixed, so we can just go along the very edge with the hot glue to lock things in. Keeping the hot glue at the edges and the mat only prevents us from seeing any obvious glue lines across the flat center areas of the mat. The tape worked better when I applied more pieces in the middle of the front to keep it from lifting away, and then I go in around the edges again with hot glue. Now these are ready to get popped back into their frames. But first, let's fix up those busted frames. For all the wood frames that had signs of damage, I hit them with a 150 grit sandpaper to smooth out any areas where the varnish and stain were chipping or dented. I try to get a smooth blend between the sanded areas and the original finish. Ideally, you would sand down the whole thing and start from scratch with a new stain application, but I want to spend 10 minutes, not 2 hours. So I'm definitely cutting corners here. After sanding, I go in with a stain I had on hand. This one is Early American from Minwax, to match the original stain shade and try to blend out the sanded areas. I apply the stain with the brush and then wipe off the excess with a rag. Again, this is not totally foolproof or perfect, but it worked surprisingly well, both in matching the color and the sheen. Who knew? For the green velvet frame, I popped out the plastic fake brass strips and pressed stain down into the crevice to color in any areas that looked unevenly colored. To finish everything off, I applied a liquid leaf gold paint to the gold areas of the frame to give the gold a warmer tone and to try to create a cleaner edge since some of the paint lines were uneven before. Well, that was the goal at least. I had a terrible time getting a clean line along the edge and overshot it a bit. So back in we go with some mineral spirits to clean up my paint job, since this is an oil-based paint. This might rub off the finish on the wood as well, so apply carefully if you mess up like me. Better not to mess up. Or just skip the gold paint entirely, it would have been fine to start with. But I'm happy with how mine turned out in the end. And with that, all the pieces are done. Let's reassemble and finish these up.
Alright, I'm super excited with how these projects turned out and I can't wait to show you how they look. But first, one more option that I wanted to point out here. You may remember that kind of coppery looking frame that we saw at the beginning. I really like the size and the shape of this frame for my bedroom. I like how it sits up on the mantle, but I don't have any art that's at these dimensions to go in this piece. I could make something myself, but I was wanting something different in this space. So I reached out to my friend Leah from Flanzella. You may remember that we did a little mini collab video last year. She's a collage artist based in Toronto and also has a channel here on YouTube. Since she and I connected last year, I've really wanted to have a piece of her art in my space, and so I went on her site and kind of scrolled through looking through her options, and I noticed on her site that you could email her to get custom print sizes, and so I found a piece that I really liked. It was pretty close to the dimensions that I needed, but not quite, and so I did email her and ask if she could do a custom print for me. It was like 9.5 by 11.75 or some weird size, and so she did it, and it's currently shipping to me now. I'll be showing that in next week's video where I do the bedroom reveal, but I just wanted to present this as an option. If you have a thrifted frame that you need art in, or if you have a specific place in your house that you need a really specific size piece, reach out to Leah or to me or to any artist that you love and see if they can do a custom print for you. Prints are a really affordable way to get art that you love in your home without having to splurge on the originals, and it's super cool that Leah's able to do custom print sizes. I'll be sure to link her site and her channel down below, so check that out. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, be sure to hit the like button. And if you want to see more tips and projects like this, or check out my final bedroom reveal next week, be sure that you're subscribed. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon.